You've probably seen the video by now. It's just a few seconds long, shot on a shaky phone, grainy and imperfect. But it's one of those clips that burns itself onto the back of your mind. You can't unsee it. It all started on a dreary Tuesday afternoon at the Greyhound Transit hub on Oakhaven Street. The air was thick with the smell of diesel fumes and damp concrete. The city of Viridia hummed its usual tired song, a symphony of distant sirens, screeching brakes, and the low chatter of people going nowhere fast. And in the middle of all that ordinary noise, something extraordinary happened, something that would break the internet in half. Her name was Alara Vance, 24 years old, just released from the state penitentiary 5 days prior. She stepped off the bus, a ghost walking back into a world that had forgotten her. She wore a simple gray hoodie, her face impassive, a statue carved from years of silence. He was Officer Marcus Thorne, badge number 734. He was leaning against a support pillar, sipping a coffee, a casual king in his forgotten concrete kingdom. He had that look, that easy, untouchable confidence of a man who has never been questioned, never been held accountable. He owned this space, the people, the sounds, the very air. It was all his. Alara didn't run, she didn't shout, she walked. Every step was deliberate, measured. Each footfall on the cracked pavement seemed to count down to something inevitable. The crowd parted around her, a sea of tired commuters and anonymous faces, none of them realizing they were about to become witnesses to history. Thorne didn't notice her at first. Why would he? She was just another face in the crowd he ruled over. But then, something in her stillness, in the directness of her path, caught his eye. He straightened up slightly. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, maybe a hint of recognition from a life he'd ruined and long since forgotten. He opened his mouth to speak. Maybe to ask a question, maybe to give a command. But he was too late. The world seemed to slow down. In that single suspended moment, Alara Vance closed the final few feet between them. There was no rage in her eyes. There was no fear. There was something far colder, far more final. There was clarity. Her right hand, hidden in the pocket of her hoodie, clenched into a fist. Her arm moved in a short, clean arc. It wasn't a wild swing. It wasn't a desperate reaction. It was a sentence, delivered with bone and muscle. The sound was the first thing that registered. A dry, cracking sound. The sound of bone meeting bone. It cut through the city's hum like a sniper's shot. Then came the visual, the spray of red against a silver badge. Thorne's head snapped back. The coffee cup flew from his hand, a brown arc against the gray sky. His knees buckled. The man who had stood like a pillar just seconds before crumpled to the ground like a paper bag. His body hit the concrete with a heavy, final thud. For a full 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. Not even the city dared to breathe. It was a vacuum, a void where the impossible had just happened. And then, a single collective gasp from the crowd. Phones which had been dormant in pockets were suddenly in the air, their small red lights blinking, all pointed at the scene. The fallen officer, and the woman who stood over him. Alara didn't look down at him with triumph. She just looked. Her expression hadn't changed. The hand that delivered the blow was now relaxed at her side, not even trembling. She held his gaze for a moment, a gaze that was now filled with shock, pain, and a dawning, humiliating understanding. The internet exploded. The world screamed, "Why? Why would a young woman just starting her life over throw it all away for one moment of violence?" They called it a senseless attack, an act of pure rage. They didn't know that the story didn't start with that punch. The punch was the period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. It was the final word in a conversation she was never allowed to have. They didn't know that 6 years of injustice, of erased evidence, of a stolen future, were all compressed into that single violent second on Oakhaven Street. In that moment, Alara wasn't an attacker. She was a messenger, and her message, delivered without a single word, was devastatingly clear. The silence is over. A single act of defiance can be louder than 1,000 unheard screams. And from that small, violent crack on a dreary Tuesday afternoon. A flood of buried truths was about to pour out, ready to drown the city that had tried so hard to silence them. To understand that punch, you have to understand the ghost that threw it. And that ghost was born 6 years ago, on a cold November evening, at the very same Greyhound hub on Oakhaven Street. Back then, Elara Vance wasn't a phantom of vengeance. She was 18 years old, a first-year pre-law student at Viridia State, and she believed. She truly, deeply believed in the law. To her, it wasn't just a collection of dusty books. It was a promise, a shield, a set of rules that were supposed to protect the weak from the strong, to make sure that everyone, no matter who they were, got a fair shot. The weight of her textbooks in her backpack felt like the weight of that promise. It was a future she was proud to carry. She was waiting for the last bus home after a late study session at the library. The air was biting, and the station's fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, dancing shadows. Her world was quiet, filled with constitutional amendments and case law precedents. That's when she saw him. Officer Marcus Thorne. He looked younger then, leaner, but the arrogance was already fully formed. It radiated from him like a toxic heat. His target that night wasn't a threat. It was an old man, probably in his late 70s, with a threadbare coat and glasses thick enough to be bottle bottoms. He was squinting at the bus schedule, his finger tracing the lines confused. Thorne approached him, not with an offer to help, but with a predator's swagger. "What's the matter, old man?" "Lost." Thorne's voice cut through the cold air. It was dripping with condescension. The old man looked up, startled. "No, officer. Just trying to see when the 11B arrives." "My eyes aren't what they used to be." Thorne let out a short, ugly laugh. "The 11B stopped running an hour ago. You're stuck here. Maybe you shouldn't be out so late if you can't handle yourself." He nudged the old man's shoulder with his baton. It wasn't a hard push. It didn't have to be. It was a push that said, "I can do this because I can. You are nothing. I am the law." Elara watched, and the promise she carried in her backpack, the belief in that shield, began to burn in her chest. She heard her professor's voice in her head. The law is only as strong as those willing to defend it. She hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then she stood up. Her own heart was pounding, but she walked forward, stepping out of the shadows. She kept a respectful distance. Her voice was firm but polite, the voice of a future lawyer. "Officer," she said clearly, "excuse me, he hasn't done anything wrong. I can help him find another route home." Thorne turned his head slowly. The condescending smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, flat stare. He scanned her from head to toe. The college sweatshirt, the backpack full of books, the look of youthful idealism in her eyes. And he hated it. He hated that she wasn't afraid. "This is official police business, miss." "Back away," he said, his voice low and menacing. "With all due respect, sir," Elara replied, her own voice not wavering. "This is a public space. I'm just offering to help a citizen. It doesn't seem like any laws are being broken." And that's when it happened. The moment the system showed its true face. Thorne didn't argue. He didn't debate the law with her. He simply acted. He closed the distance in 2 quick strides. "You want to interfere?" he snarled. He snatched the phone from her hand before she could even think to press record. The cheap plastic case shattered as it hit the concrete. "Hey!" she cried out, more in shock than anger. That was all the excuse he needed. He grabbed her by the shoulders of her sweatshirt. He was surprisingly strong. She felt herself being lifted, her feet scrambling for purchase. And then he slammed her backwards, hard against the cold brick wall of the station. The impact knocked the wind out of her. A sharp, searing pain exploded at the back of her head. For a second, the flickering lights of the station blurred into a dizzying smear. She tasted copper in her mouth. Before she could even process the pain, her arms were wrenched behind her back. The cold, brutal click of handcuffs echoed in the sudden silence. The old man had vanished. The few other people waiting had turned away, suddenly fascinated by their shoes. No one wanted to be next. "You're under arrest," Thorne's voice hissed in her ear, his breath hot and sour. "Assaulting a police officer." The charge was so absurd, so completely disconnected from reality that for a moment, Alara thought she was in a nightmare. She, who had memorized the definition of assault, who dreamed of defending the innocent, was now the one in chains. The journey through the legal system was a blur of cold steel and colder indifference. At the station, no one asked about the bleeding scrape on her cheek or the swelling bruise on the back of her head. They saw her through Thorne's report, and his report was the gospel. Subject became aggressive, initiated physical contact, resisted arrest. It was a work of fiction, but it was the only story that was officially filed. Her public defender was a man whose spirit had been crushed by the system years ago. He glanced at her case file for less than 5 minutes. "Look," he said, not meeting her eyes. "It's your word against a cop's. Take a plea deal, lesser charge. You'll do a bit of time, but you'll get out. You fight this, you'll lose, and they'll throw the book at you." She refused. "But it's a lie," she pleaded. "The whole thing is a lie." The lawyer just sighed. "Kid, they're all lies. Just pick the one you can live with." In the courtroom, it was even worse. The judge looked bored. The prosecutor read Thorne's report aloud as if it were fact. When Alara tried to tell her side of the story, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and indignation, she could see the disbelief on their faces. She was just another angry kid, another problem. Thorne, in his crisp uniform, sat there looking calm, professional, like a man who had bravely subdued a threat. The verdict came down like a guillotine. Guilty. 6 years. Alara didn't cry. She was too numb. She sat there as the bailiff led her away, the sound of the gavel still echoing in her ears. She looked at her mother in the back row, her face a mask of silent, shattering grief. In that moment, it wasn't just a prison sentence that was handed down. It was the execution of a dream. It was the murder of her faith in the very idea of justice. The system she had sworn to uphold had turned on her, chewed her up, and spat her out without a second thought. The world Alara Vance had believed in, a world of rules and rights and fairness, was a lie. The only truth left was the cold reality of the cell door slamming shut behind her. A memory, when held on to with enough conviction, can become its own form of evidence, waiting for a new trial. But what Alara didn't know then, what no one could have known, was that this wasn't a random act of cruelty. Her name was already on a list, long before she ever dared to speak a word that night. Alara's punch didn't just create a crack in the silence. It created a vacuum. And the media, the internet, the entire world rushed in to fill it. The video looped endlessly on every screen. Pundits debated. Politicians gave statements. But beneath the noise, a different kind of work was being done. A quieter, more patient kind of work. It was being done by journalists, by online sleuths, by digital detectives who knew that a story this clean on the surface was always hiding something dirty underneath. They started digging, not into Alara, but into him, Officer Marcus Thorne. They filed information requests. They scoured public records. They talked to retired cops off the record. For weeks, it was nothing. A wall of bureaucratic silence. Thorne's record was, officially, spotless. Commendations, positive reviews, a model officer. It felt like a dead end. And then it happened. An anonymous email, sent from an encrypted, untraceable address to a small, independent news outlet in Viridia. The email had no message, just a single password-protected file attached. The file name was simple, almost mundane. Departmental Oversight Q3.XLSX. It looked like just another boring spreadsheet, but when they opened it, their blood ran cold. What they found wasn't a list of departmental expenses. It wasn't a duty roster. It was a list of names, more than 300 of them, and it was immediately clear what tied them all together. Every single name on that list belonged to a Black or Latino resident of Viridia. This wasn't a criminal database. Most of the people on the list had clean records, maybe a minor traffic violation at most. Beside each name was a small typed note. The notes weren't about crimes. They were about attitudes. You could feel the chill coming off the screen as you read them. Javier R. age 42. Note, organizes weekly community meetings at the local library. Aisha K. age 27. Note, frequently films police activity in her neighborhood. Samuel T. age 19. Note, student activist. Handed out Know Your Rights pamphlets. This was a list of people who paid attention, a list of people who asked questions, a list of people who weren't afraid. It was a list of people the Veridia PD considered a problem. They called it the Oversight List, a benign bureaucratic name for something truly sinister. It was a watch list, a thought crime ledger, a modern-day political enemies list, targeting not criminals, but citizens who dared to hold power accountable. The journalists scrolled through the names, a pit forming in their stomachs. Each name was a person, a life, unknowingly marked by a system that was supposed to protect them. They saw teachers, small business owners, students, grandparents, all of them branded as potential threats for simply being engaged members of their community. And then, about halfway down the list, they saw it, a name that made the entire newsroom fall silent. Vance Ilara, age 18, note, pre-law student, opinionated. Read that again. Opinionated. The discovery was a lightning bolt. It recontextualized everything. Ilara's arrest 6 years ago, it wasn't a random encounter that went wrong. It wasn't about her interfering with the arrest of an old man. It was never about that. She was already a target. Her crime wasn't speaking up that night. Her crime was her ambition. Her crime was her education. Her crime, in the eyes of Marcus Thorne and the system he represented, was being a young black woman on her way to understanding the law. A woman who was opinionated enough to believe that the law should apply to everyone, even him. They didn't just arrest a person that night. They moved on a target. They neutralized a name on their secret list. They saw a spark of defiance, and they didn't just want to extinguish it. They wanted to make an example of it. They wanted to show what happens to people who think they're smart, to people who are opinionated. Imagine that for a second. Imagine discovering that the worst moment of your life wasn't an accident. It was an assignment. Imagine realizing you were being hunted by the very people who wear a badge and swear an oath to protect you. That your future was stolen from you not because of what you did, but because of who you had the potential to become. This list changed the entire narrative. It was no longer a story about one woman's revenge against one bad cop. It was now a story about a coordinated, systemic campaign to profile and suppress dissent within minority communities. The system didn't just fail Ilara Vance. It was built to fail people like her. She didn't fall through the cracks. She was pushed into a chasm that had been dug for her long ago. The most dangerous secrets are not the ones buried in the ground. They are the ones written down in black and white, filed away in a spreadsheet, hidden behind a bland name like Oversight. And now one of those secrets was out. The list told the world who the system was targeting and why. It was a bombshell. But it only led to an even more terrifying question. If this list told them who to target, there had to be another secret that told them how. A playbook. A set of rules for making people disappear from the system, quietly and efficiently. The Oversight list was a bombshell. It told us who the system was targeting. It told us why Ilara Vance was never just a random girl at a bus stop. She was a name on a list, an opinionated pre-law student who needed to be watched. But that discovery, as shocking as it was, only opened the door to a darker, more terrifying question. A question that kept journalists and investigators awake at night. How? How did they do it? How did Officer Thorne, and potentially others, neutralize these targets so effectively, so cleanly, that almost no official complaints ever stuck? How did they create a system where the truth simply vanished? The answer didn't come from a spreadsheet. It came from a place of deep personal risk, a second leak. This time, it wasn't just a data file. It was a series of scanned pages sent to a trusted journalist from the personal email of a young officer who, after seeing Ilara's story, could no longer live with the silence. He risked his career, his safety, everything to get this out. The pages were coffee-stained, dog-eared. They were not part of any official police manual. This was something else, an underground playbook, a secret scripture for the corrupt. It had a title, typed at the top of the first page, a title that sounds chillingly bureaucratic, chillingly calm. Protocol 17, Silent containment. It wasn't a set of guidelines. It was a recipe. A four-step recipe for how to dismantle a person's reality, erase their credibility, and contain their dissent, all under the color of law. As we go through these steps, I want you to remember Alara's story, because you will see that what happened to her wasn't a tragedy. It was a procedure. Step 1. The invitation. The protocol states that the initial contact should be based on a minor, almost non-existent pretext. Loitering, a vague noise complaint, looking suspicious. The goal isn't to enforce a real law. The goal is to create a confrontation where the officer has absolute control from the very first second. It's about psychology. Make the target feel small. Make them feel like they're in the wrong, even when they're not. It's an invitation into a game they don't know they're playing, a game that is rigged against them. Sound familiar? An old man struggling to read a bus schedule. That was the invitation Thorne used on the night he arrested Alara. A situation of manufactured authority designed to test the waters to see who might push back. Step 2. The flinch. This is the core of the protocol, the twisted genius of it. The protocol instructs the officer to escalate their verbal commands, to get closer, to create a feeling of pressure. And then they wait for the flinch. What is the flinch? It can be anything. It can be the target taking a step back in fear. It can be them raising a hand to shield their face. It can be them questioning the officer's command. Or in the modern age, the most common flinch of all is reaching for a cell phone to record. The moment the target flinches, the protocol dictates that this action is to be immediately reframed as noncompliance, resisting, or most damningly, aggression. The target's natural human reaction to being intimidated is twisted into the justification for what comes next. It's a legal trap. You react, you lose. You don't react, you lose. Alara Vance's flinch was her belief in the law. Her flinch was raising her voice, polite but firm. Her flinch was her existence as a challenge. But her actionable flinch, the one Thorne was waiting for, it was the idea that she might hold up her phone. He didn't even wait for her to do it. He saw the potential for it, and that was enough. He used that imagined flinch as the trigger for his assault. Step 3. The erasure. This is the step that makes the system truly terrifying. Protocol 17 contains a detailed subsection on what it calls evidence neutralization. This is how they make the truth disappear. The methods are simple and brutally effective. The body camera that malfunctions at the critical moment, with the officer noting in his report that he tapped it, but it seemed to have suffered a power failure. The security camera footage from a nearby store that becomes corrupted during transfer. And the most common method of all, the target's own cell phone. It is to be seized as evidence. If it was damaged during the struggle, as it so often is, it's logged as unrecoverable. If it's intact, it's buried in an evidence locker, tangled in so much red tape that no lawyer, especially not a court-appointed one, will ever have the time or resources to get it. This step does more than just destroy evidence. It gaslights the victim. It makes them feel insane. They know what happened. They know what they saw. They know what they recorded. But the system tells them, no, you didn't. It doesn't exist. It's a form of psychological warfare. Alara's phone smashed on the concrete of Oakhaven Street was not an accident. It was the erasure executed perfectly. The one piece of objective truth in the entire encounter was neutralized in the first 30 seconds. Step 4. The narrative. The final step. With the target discredited and all conflicting evidence gone, the officer is free to write the narrative. The protocol provides a template of phrases to use. Soulless, bureaucratic language designed to sound objective and professional. Subject displayed agitated and erratic behavior. Officer attempted to de-escalate the situation verbally. A minimal level of physical force was required to ensure officer and public safety. Subject continued to be non-compliant throughout the booking process. It's a masterpiece of fiction, a story written to be believed by supervisors, prosecutors, and judges who are too overworked or too indifferent to question it. It transforms a violent assertion of power into a measured professional response to a public threat. It turns the victim into the aggressor and the aggressor into the hero. Thorne's official report on the arrest of Alara Vance could have been copied and pasted directly from Protocol 17. It was a flawless execution of the narrative. It painted a picture of a brave officer dealing with an unstable young woman, and in a courtroom, a story on paper from a man with a badge is worth more than the desperate, truthful pleas of the person in handcuffs. This protocol wasn't just a set of suggestions. It was a machine designed to take a human being, a citizen with rights and a future, and process them into a case number, a guilty verdict, and a forgotten memory. Alara Vance wasn't a person to Marcus Thorne that night. She was just another successful run of the protocol, a problem identified and contained. Silently, the most powerful weapon against a secret script is to find it and read it out loud for the whole world to hear. But the protocol, as chilling as it was, explained the how. It didn't fully explain the why. Why go to all this trouble? Why create such an elaborate, risky system of suppression? The answer, as it so often is, was not about justice or maintaining order. It was about something far simpler and far more corrupt. We have the who, the oversight list, a secret registry of citizens deemed too aware, too opinionated. We have the how. Protocol 17, a cold, clinical recipe for manufacturing arrests, erasing evidence, and silencing the truth. But one question remained, the final, nagging question that sits at the bottom of every conspiracy. Why? Why go to all this trouble? Why create such an elaborate, risky system of oppression? Was it just about power? Was it just about a racist ideology wanting to maintain control? Yes, it was about all of those things, but the final secret, the ugliest one of all, revealed that it was also about something much older, much simpler, much more human: greed. The discovery didn't come from a cop with a guilty conscience or a journalist with a source. It came from a place no one thought to look, the city's budget office. It came from a young financial analyst, a woman who lived in a world of numbers and spreadsheets. She wasn't looking for a conspiracy. She was just doing her job, trying to reconcile the city's accounts late one night. And she found an anomaly, a ghost account. It had a perfectly boring, official-sounding name, the Civic Enforcement Fund. On paper, it was meant for miscellaneous operational costs, buying new office supplies, paying for gas, small, untraceable things. It had a modest, steady budget allocated by the city. But when the analyst looked closer, she saw two sets of books. There was the official money going in, and then there was other money. A lot of other money. She spent weeks working after hours, pulling on this single loose thread. And the more she pulled, the more a monstrous tapestry of corruption unraveled before her eyes. The Civic Enforcement Fund wasn't just an expense account. It was a slush fund, a secret off-the-books bank account for Officer Thorne and a select group of his colleagues and supervisors. Over the last 3 years alone, more than $600,000 had flowed through it. Where did the money come from? The analyst traced the deposits. The money came from asset forfeiture, cash seized during arrests, fines for petty, often invented infractions. The pattern was undeniable. A disproportionate number of these deposits were directly linked to arrests made by Thorne and his unit, arrests of individuals whose names appeared on the oversight list. Here is how the business model worked. You use Protocol 17 to initiate a stop against a target from the list. You manufacture a reason for an arrest. During the arrest, you seize any cash they have on them. Maybe it's $20. Maybe it's $200. You seize their car, their phone. Then the magic trick. The criminal charges against the target are often quietly dropped a few weeks later for lack of evidence. This is a feature, not a bug. Because the charges are dropped, the person doesn't have a criminal record, and they feel lucky just to be free. They are less likely to fight to get their property back. It's too expensive, too complicated. The cash, the car, the phone, it all gets absorbed. A significant portion of its value gets funneled through a series of bureaucratic loopholes directly into the Civic Enforcement Fund. It was a parasitic enterprise. It fed on the fear and helplessness of the people it targeted. They were turning human misery into cash flow. And where did the money go? The analyst traced the withdrawals. It went to unexplainable overtime payments for Thorne and his crew. It went to specialized surveillance equipment that was never actually purchased. It went to bonuses. It even went to things as mundane as expensive dinners and travel expenses, all disguised as operational costs. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a brutal cop enforcing a racist ideology. He was one of the system's top earners. Every stop, every arrest, every life he dismantled contributed to his own bottom line and that of his superiors. This was the final sickening revelation. This was the true face of the machine. Ilara Vance, the 18-year-old law student, wasn't just a threat to their power. She, and people like her, were a resource. They were a line item in a corrupt budget. When Thorne slammed her against that wall, he wasn't just silencing an opinionated voice. He was protecting a revenue stream. The few dollars in her wallet, the value of her phone. It was all just a small transaction in their vast criminal enterprise. It's one thing to be the victim of a hateful ideology. It's another, somehow more dehumanizing thing to realize you were just a business opportunity. To realize your stolen future, your years behind bars, your trauma, it all just helped some men in uniforms pay for a steak dinner. The system wasn't just broken. It wasn't just rotten. It was a business. And its business was profiting from the destruction of lives. When you finally follow the money, you almost always find the ugliest truth. The list, the protocol, the money, all the pieces were finally on the table. The secrets were out. And once a truth that monstrous is unleashed upon the world, it doesn't just ask for justice. It demands a reckoning. The only thing left was to watch the dominoes fall. The secrets were out. The list, the protocol, the money. The story of Officer Marcus Thorne in the corrupt heart of the Viridia Police Department was laid bare for the world to see. It was a firestorm. But in every firestorm, there is a moment when the wind changes. A final, powerful gust that makes the embers explode. That moment came on a Thursday morning. Another leak. The final one. The one that had been buried the deepest. Someone, a ghost in the machine with a conscience, had held on to it for 6 long years. It was the original video from Ilara Vance's cell phone, recovered from a forgotten backup server deep within the precinct's IT department. And it showed everything. It showed an 18-year-old Ilara, polite and calm. It showed her asking questions. It showed Marcus Thorne, unprovoked, grabbing her, slamming her into the unforgiving brick wall. It captured the sickening sound of her head hitting the wall. And it captured his voice clear as day, snarling the words that would become his epitaph. "We'll make an example of you." There was no more debate, no more two sides to every story. There was only the ugly, undeniable truth on video. The system, which had protected Thorne for so long, could no longer sustain its own lies. The dominoes didn't just fall, they shattered. The knock on Marcus Thorne's door came just after sunrise. 2 federal agents, not his old colleagues. They didn't come with questions. They came with a warrant and a pair of handcuffs. The news cameras, tipped off by an anonymous source, were there to capture it all. They filmed him walking out of his suburban home, not in his crisp, intimidating uniform, but in sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. He looked small, defeated. The once king of Oakhaven Street now couldn't even meet the camera's gaze. The cold click of the handcuffs around his wrist was the only sound that mattered. The fallout was swift and brutal. The deputy chief of police, the man who had ignored the complaints against Thorne for years, was forced to resign in disgrace. The mayor of Viridia held a press conference, her face grim, announcing a full, top-to-bottom federal investigation into the department, calling it a cancer of corruption. And Ilara Vance walked back into that same courthouse one last time. The air was different now. The pillars didn't seem so imposing. The fluorescent lights didn't buzz with the same indifference. She walked up the marble steps, not in handcuffs, but in a simple black suit, flanked by her legal team. The gallery was packed, not with bored onlookers, but with the faces from the Oversight list. The teacher, the student activist, the community organizer. They were all there, silent witnesses to her vindication. She took the stand, not to defend herself, but to testify against the system that had tried to crush her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't point or accuse. She simply told the truth, her voice steady and clear. At the end of her testimony, the judge, a woman who had followed the case with growing horror, looked at her, not as a defendant, but as a survivor. "Miss Vance," the judge said, her voice filled with a quiet respect, "is there anything you would like to say to the public?" Ilara paused. She looked across the room at Marcus Thorne. He sat at the defendant's table, hunched over, a shell of the man he once was. She saw not the monster who had haunted her nightmares, but a relic, a broken cog from a broken machine. She turned her gaze back to the court, to the people, to the cameras. "I don't stand here today with hatred in my heart," she began, her voice resonating through the silent room. "I have already lost 6 years to the emotions that this system creates: fear, anger, and silence. I was once a pawn in a game whose rules I didn't understand, but I'm not a pawn anymore." She took a breath, her voice gaining strength. Now I want to help write the rules." There was no applause, just a profound, heavy silence. A silence filled with understanding. The justice she had received wasn't about one man going to jail. It was about earning the right to build something better in its place. A few months later, on a Saturday afternoon, in a small, brightly lit room at the Oakhaven Community Center, Ilara Vance stood in front of a whiteboard. The room was filled with mismatched chairs and about 20 teenagers from the surrounding neighborhoods. There were no cameras here, no headlines, just the quiet attention of young faces looking for a reason to believe. On the board she had written in black marker, "Knowledge is protection." She wasn't teaching them how to fight. She wasn't teaching them how to throw a punch. She was teaching them about Protocol 17. She was teaching them about their rights. She was taking the very playbook that had been used to entrap her, and she was handing it to them, showing them how to dismantle the trap before it could ever spring shut. She was turning her deepest trauma into their greatest armor. That is the final scene. That is the true victory. Not the fall of a corrupt man, but the rise of an empowered community. The timeless message of this story is not found in the violence of the punch, but in the resilience that followed. It's a stark reminder that truth, no matter how deep you bury it, has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. It doesn't need an invitation. It just needs one person, somewhere, who refuses to forget. And this story connects to you, to me, to all of us. You may never face a Marcus Thorne. You may never have to endure what Ilara did. But every single day we are faced with small choices. The choice to look away from a small injustice, or the choice to speak up. Ilara's journey started with a few simple words. He hasn't done anything wrong. Your journey, my journey, it can start just as simply. It starts by deciding that silence is no longer an option. Please share this story, not to celebrate a single act, but to celebrate the incredible courage it takes to demand the truth. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, let us know in the comments what part will stay with you the longest. Hit the like button to help spread this message of resilience to more people, and subscribe to our channel to join us as we continue to uncover the stories that need to be told. Thank you truly for listening.